Let's get more with Neysun Mahboubi. He's a research scholar at the Center for the Study of Contemporary China at the University of Pennsylvania. And good to have you with us, Neysun. Let's get straight into it. Beijing is planning to invest over $1 trillion long-term across more than 60 countries in the One Belt, One Road initiative. Why is this so important to China?
So I would, thanks for having me on, Michelle. I would say there's three major things that come to mind. First of all, most concretely, this is about exporting this increasingly underutilized industrial capacity that has driven Chinese growth for all these years, but is increasingly reaching limits in terms of domestic capacity. So that's most concrete. But then at a broader geostrategic level, this is probably about asserting Chinese leadership in the region, perhaps filling the vacuum that's left by the U.S. withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and in general seeming to move away from globalization. And lastly, I'd say there's also a domestic audience for this. We're in the lead up to the 19th Party Congress. Xi Jinping is trying to consolidate his power before that. And this kind of a big type of project can convey a degree of strength and attention to economic growth is probably useful for him for domestic political reasons. Now,
Neysun, you mentioned that this is China's push to be the global leader. Now, it was interesting because Beijing said that this is the most important diplomatic event of the year. We had leaders from Africa, Asia, Latin America. They all came, but very few European leaders showed up. President Trump, Angela Merkel, Theresa May, they all skipped it. What do you make of that?
So, I mean, to start off, we should say there are 29 heads of state, including Putin and Erdogan are there. Of the G7, as you sort of indicate, there's not a lot of heads of state. I think there's only one, the Prime Minister of Italy. As far as the other countries, I wouldn't undersell too much the delegations they've sent. It may not be the heads of state, but from many of these countries, they are relatively important figures. You know, from Britain, there's the Chancellor of Exchequer, high-level government officials from Germany. U.S. is very interesting. You're right. Not only is President Trump not there, but until Friday, the U.S. delegation was going to be headed by a pretty, mid-level Commerce Department official, and that just got upgraded on Friday to Matt Pottinger, right, the National Security Council director for China. What I think it conveys is probably some degree of hesitation about this project, but waiting to see what happens. But I wouldn't say that it's not being taken seriously. There are still relatively significant officials from these other countries that are there.
Well, it's a very serious undertaking. It plans, as we said, to build infrastructure, and we have a map of this from China across to Europe. There it is. It follows the so-called ancient Silk Road. This will have, of course, more modern infrastructure. But in the meantime, the EU is refusing to endorse part of this, even though it could really be beneficial to its economies and companies, because it says it doesn't include commitments to social and environmental sustainability and transparency. How consequential is the EU's refusal?
Well, we'll have to see how things play out, but there's clearly a concern with respect to whether China, in exporting its industry in this way, will also be exporting a lot of the negative aspects of Chinese economic growth over the past 25, 30 years, the environmental degradation, maybe less attention to citizen rights, as you might have in other countries. And so there's a real concern there, and we'll have to kind of see how it plays out. But if we looked at the example of China's similar work in, let's say, Africa over the past 10, 15 years, the early returns aren't necessarily very promising.
Neysun, very quickly, Beijing is promoting itself as a champion of free trade at a time, like you said, when President Trump has been questioning trade deals and pursuing an America-first foreign policy. But isn't this just global commerce on China's terms?
Well, I mean, we'll have to see how it plays out. That's certainly a framing that makes a lot of sense. A few caveats. One is that, when you look at, let's say, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which started in 2013 just as they were starting up this One Belt, One Road initiative, people had similar concerns about that. And it turns out that the Asian Infrastructure Bank actually satisfies a lot of international sort of standards with respect to trade and these kinds of things. So that seems promising. Right. And also there's a lot of risks to China in this initiative. This could potentially be a vehicle for more capital flight out of China. This could be another way where banks in China face non-performing loans in different countries. So we'll have to see. But certainly as a general framing, in this vacuum that's created by the U.S. withdrawal in some ways from the region, that your framing does make a lot of sense.
All right, thanks so much, Neysun Mahboubi.